Thanks everyone. On to the next session just before lunch, and related to what we just heard, and also something different. We're moving beyond the US and Western digital platforms that we're familiar with, and starting to look at some of the Chinese platforms which do play a remarkably significant role in our elections, in our news and media, as well as globally. So a great chance to discuss this with two extraordinary researchers, colleagues in our ADM+S Centre. And let me introduce them. Fan Yang is a postdoctoral research fellow in ADM+S at the University of Melbourne node, and her work is particularly significant, I think, for us to consider because she's led a major project over a number of years on the role of WeChat in Australian elections. She's got one of the largest data sets from WeChat to work with, and she's also worked extensively on a range of other projects around Chinese social media. Haiqing Yu, my colleague here at RMIT, is a Professor of Media and Communications here and an ARC Future Fellow working on the Chinese social credit system. Haiqing's a critical media studies scholar and she's been working on Chinese digital media for many years. She's also a chief investigator in our ADM+S Centre. So I thought we'd start trying to pursue this session in a fairly conversational mode, but begin at least by giving Fan and Haiqing a chance to talk about their work and what they've been finding. Beginning with you, Fan.
Thanks. Thanks for having me here. My name is Fan Yang, and I work as a postdoctoral research fellow at Melbourne University, Melbourne Law School, IASC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making Society. I'd like to acknowledge that me and my team, Dr. Robbie Fordyce from Monash University and Dr. Luke Himsbergen from Deakin University, we live and work on the land of Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. We acknowledge their past, present, emerging. The land was and will be Aboriginal land. So we started our project from 2016. From 2018, I started monitoring what has been discussed on WeChat in relation to Australian federal elections. And the reason that we started this project, and I guess I would have to give people a bit of context in terms of what WeChat is. So WeChat is a primary social media service for Chinese-speaking communities around the world, and it is understood as a kind of one-in-all platform or application that contains messaging function, gaming function, e-commerce, short video functions, and all these functions all together. And discussions about WeChat role in Australia and also in the United States are mostly surrounded by the concerns of cybersecurity and foreign interference. And in 2018, our question was that, how can we understand this platform? How can we understand the impact of this platform on Australian federal elections? And instead of sitting on these assumptions or presumptions, how can we provide evidence to see, okay, this is how influence, this is how interference worked, and this is how political influence domestically and internationally worked. From then, we started collecting data, public posts from WeChat for anyone who had experience of working with data collection from Chinese social media services. We'll know that it's rather enclosed system in a sense that bots are banned and automated methods are banned from those platforms. That kind of create a huge issue for us. How could we use API to manage our data collection, and also we wanted to have our data collection in an ongoing way, in a continuous way, so that we can have immersive ethnographic method, so that we can continually observe what's going on that space. In the end, we gave it up. So I thought it's pretty funny that Dan was talking about guerrilla approach, and we kind of in our method paper we talked about our method is a kind of guerrilla's method, in a sense that we're not trying to be resistant. We're not trying to make those platforms block us. In a way that we try to leverage what they want us to do. We figure out that what they want us to do is to share the post outside of WeChat. So we leverage the function, we leverage the sharing function of WeChat, and we share the post to our intermediary channel, and then we plug in automated method to scrape data from our intermediary channel. And this method is being coined by Robbie Fordyce as share capture. And from 2018 to now, we have been managing and maintaining the largest data set about Australian politics from WeChat and about WeChat. And we have been providing quite significant insights to Australian national media and public service. And this year, we also have Race from the Susan McCain Foundation came on board to collaborate with us. And we have been working on how public opinion and public sentiment has been manufactured and has been represented during the 2024 Queensland state election, and the forthcoming one will be 2025 Australian federal election. Over to you.
Haiqing, do you want to tell us a little bit about your reflections on your work in this space?
All right. I've been researching on Chinese digital and social media in China firstly, and then later on in Australia, and then now more global Chinese speaking world, including Taiwan and Asia Pacific. So Wang Ningsun from UTS and I had the ARC big grant from 2018 to 2022 on Chinese digital and the social media in Australia. So we did lots of research about Chinese in diaspora, digital diaspora, the engagement with social media platforms such as WeChat, Xiaohongshu, TikTok, etc., and the impact on their digital citizenship in Australia. So concerning the disinformation, misinformation campaign by the Chinese actors, we also did some research. I know, of course, later on, as part of the ADM+S Center member, and I have done lots of research concerning Chinese language digital influence across platforms and beyond Chinese language platforms. As we know, Fan and her collaborators have done lots of research with large empirical data concerning Chinese influence operation on WeChat. She will share a bit more. I won't go into that. But we also know, WeChat is only one of many Chinese language platforms, and increasingly Little Red Book, known as Red, has become the most popular social media platforms among Chinese population in Australia and elsewhere in the world. And when it comes to the platforms, I always ask, well, let's look beyond the Chinese language platforms, because when you think about the influence, who do they want to influence? Okay, first of all, I want to say influence operation is not new. Okay, so ever since the missionaries, think about the missionaries, think about the Hollywood movies, think about K-pop, J-pop, think about, all the Confucius Institute, etc., etc. So all the influence has been, foreign influence has been around for a long time, except now we have better tools, whether you're talking about social media platforms or AI. Secondly, disinformation has also a long time. Jonathan Swift said, the truth, whenever there's a truth, the lies just always flies ahead of the truth, something like along the line. And again, what defines as disinformation, as we just last panel just talked about, Tim just talked about. So what is truth? What is untruth? Okay, so disinformation is not just about directly lying in your face, but actually mixing truth with untruth, facts with opinion. So when you think about the foreign interference, such as the Chinese or the Russian or the Ukrainian influence in the Taiwan election, which or the U.S. in the U.S. election, in the Taiwan election, which I'll talk a little bit more, because this is where I watched earlier this year as a Chinese-speaking person. So as I said, when I look at Chinese language social media platforms and Chinese digital culture, I don't just look at PRC China. That's only just one part of the Chinese-speaking world. I've actually been looking quite a lot, following what's happening in Taiwan, and I will share a bit more about what Taiwan experience can tell us about Australia. But anyway, so the point is, when we think about all the platforms, think about the truth. So when you mix truth with untruth, emotions always trump. So I will reflect a little bit more on the voice referendum and how the post-truth communication was carried on Red and WeChat among the Chinese-speaking world in Australia. So that's when I will share a little bit more, but also about the strategies. What kind of strategies they use, and beyond the Chinese-speaking platforms, and beyond major platforms as well. So we think about WeChat, Red. We think about Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. We think about TikTok, Line, etc. But there are smaller platforms that are also utilized to spread so-called misinformation, if you believe so. So I will share a bit more on that later on. Thanks.
Okay, thank you both for those very crisp outlines of the work you're doing. I wanted to ask, just to get the conversation going, I suppose, was what do you think, and I'll turn to each of you for an answer to this, but what does the media and information landscape in Australia look like for Chinese diasporic communities? And how is that landscape different from what's been represented in our national English-speaking media? Maybe I'll start with you, Fan, and your reflections on that as well, Haiqing, would be great.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really complicated issue, and I also think that as researchers, we're also in our own silo as well, in our own network. And from what I understand, the landscape of Chinese diaspora media is really diverse and is blended by, for example, so-called new actors who are mostly, for example, Chinese international media entrepreneurs. Media entrepreneurs immigrated to this country in the past 10 to 20 years, and legacy entrepreneurs for legacy Chinese language media, including newspapers, magazines, and also radios. And also, I guess they also have very different orientations and interests as well. Some of them are more interested in speaking to the so-called general public, and the general public is mostly about Chinese migrants and tourists and people who are based in mainland China with significant interest of investing and receiving education in Australia. And there are also Chinese diaspora media outlets that focus on business elites, small business owners, and as well. And we, so quite recently, we expanded our project to look into not just WeChat, but also Red, Xiaohongshu, also known as Little Red Book or Little Sweet Potato, and also Chinese language political vloggers on YouTube. And in those spaces, we have also seen Chinese vloggers who share about their life, and then, at some point they talk about political issues, policy updates, and then their, content has been, reframed from apolitical to political, which has been something we have witnessed during the voice referendum last year, when Chinese diaspora vloggers, they're sharing their life in a park, the good food, and then they're talking about their opinions about indigenous communities and the forthcoming voice referendum. And then, we started being alarmed about such content, and so-called lifestyle, a political platform can be converted into something really political that is outside the, scholarly outside or scholarly attention. And we've also started diving into the space of YouTube when we figure out there are people talking about religious content on that space because religious WeChat official accounts were banned or removed like a couple of years ago. So it's a really diverse space, and I can only focus on the online space that pretty much constitute like 80% of my workload. And there are also offline space as well, which I haven't yet got a chance to look into.
Fantastic. Haiqing, perhaps taking up those comments about the voice referendum, which I know you've thought a lot about in particular as well.
Yes, I had a published opinion piece on that for lack of time to write a longer piece. Yeah, all right. Talking about the media landscape, Fan has already given you a very broad, description of what it's like. And as we know, Chinese Australians, are very privileged to be able to access both the platforms that everybody else in this room have access to, but also those platforms specific to Chinese-speaking people. So therefore you see the messages, the information flows across among different platforms. Quite often, the false information you see in WeChat groups actually are originally from Twitter, and then the stuff from Little Red Book then is again, translated and misrepresented on other social platforms. That kind of, information flow cross platform is very usual and often happens a lot. And it's sometimes very hard for us as ordinary users to tell where it's originally from, who actually started it. It's just, the kind of traceability is very hard to find nowadays. Okay, in a voice referendum, so I have watched closely on Red and WeChat last year, and to understand how both the yes campaigners and the no campaigners are communicating about their own messages. In the process, I find what's amazing is how both campaign camps use misinformation to label and silence the other part. Okay, so one example is, a colleague from the Guardian. Anyway, there was somebody shared in one of the WeChat groups I followed. So a Guardian article say, hey, the voice referendum fact-checking 7 misinformation from the yes people, yes campaigners, and it was shared in one of the groups. But then a no campaigner said immediately, this is disinformation. And how do you know, this is a disinformation from the yes campaign. I don't believe what the Guardian said at all. And then another person jumped in to say, you are exactly the target that the no campaigners want. This is, the authority, this is the mainstream media, why can't you believe it? And then another person jumped in to say, well, this is what you believe. Well, back to what we talked before. If you believe it, it's no lie. So again, it's opinion trumps, and rather than checking the information, and now it becomes emotional battle. So based on that, and I was like, wow, again, the problem is not, who says what, whether who says right or not, but actually when you address opinion as facts, as discourse, and those discourses are then addressed up as information, as truth, then the lines between truth and untruth becomes fuzzy. In that situation, we call it in the era of post-truth communication. There are multiple truths, there are multiple misinformation, and they are mutable as well. And the information does not explain the world or persuade by itself. And the reality becomes a matter of interpretation, dominated by opinions, emotions. And that, actually, understanding that is important to understand the so-called organized information operation by foreign actors. So instead of just trying to persuade you with so-called facts, it's about opinion. Instead of telling you directly, let me tell you what it is, but actually, do you believe this? This is what they say. Do you believe this? Wow, it's terrible. See, it's emotion engagement first, and then opinion. and then rouse your fear or doubt about Western democracy, etc. So I'm just using this small case in Australia to think about beyond the cases beyond Australia, and thinking about what happened in January last year in Taiwan during the Taiwan election. You know, you can see the similar kind of pattern going on.
Thanks, Haiqing. What we might open it up. There's a few hands up. So, yes, over to you.
News Verify. I wanted to know, did you see mis and disinformation campaigns during The Voice that were specifically targeting the Chinese community, or was it an extension of dis and misinformation that was being sort of extended to the broader community? And if so, what were you seeing?
I didn't see any foreign, I don't have any evidence to show there's any foreign interference in our voice referendum. It's, as you said, it's more about what's happening in broadly that has been translated into Chinese and, you know, it's circulated among the Chinese speaking groups or social media platforms. What about you, Fan?
Thanks for the question. We can add on that. We have indeed have a specific data set about a public post, users' comments and short videos from WeChat in relation to the voice referendum. We have collected 267 public posts from WeChat, including and also 20 short videos published through WeChat new function, which is called channel, which is a short video function, and 2,600, I assume, but 2,600 onwards user comments on the WeChat public post and short videos. And just to respond to your question and to add a little bit context in terms of how WeChat works in Australia, most of the vast majority of WeChat official accounts, which is the information publication function on WeChat, has been used by Chinese language media diasporas. And instead of creating their own content, what they normally do is translate news information from Australian national media sources. And many of them would prefer not the ABC, not the Guardian, not the SBS, but Daily Mail. Yes, devastating. So one of the reasons with that, the aim or the main objective of those Chinese language media entrepreneurs was to get enough traffic. They brand themselves as platform, right? It's, you know, it's kind of discourse used by Mark Zuckerberg. It's the platform. We try to be inclusive for whom? To whom? Advertisers, for revenues, not the audience, right? And then the reason that they tend to translate news information from the Daily Mail was because they consider that Daily Mail has broader reach in terms of their audience, whereas, for example, the ABC might target people who are well-educated social elites. As you said, in our data set, we didn't identify the so-called foreign interference or coordinated actions, and we also didn't see Chinese WeChat official accounts coming from Chinese embassy or Chinese embassy based in Perth publish anything in relation to Australian elections or the voice referendum. So what we have indeed observed was the translation and contextualization of misinformation and disinformation, exactly like Haiqing just pointed out. The Guardian and the AEC, they published the fact-checking guidelines, right? And they list out, okay, those are disinformation narratives and they're not true, right? And then this content, I didn't really think they were translated into Chinese or used by Chinese diaspora media outlets, but if at some point they had been deployed or been translated, it wouldn't be of much use because in the Chinese language space, they have very contextualized this information that connected to the community. I actually have slides because I just presented this work yesterday, and I can show you the disinformation narratives targeting Chinese communities and the shared narratives and the English narratives. Let's speak afterwards. Yeah, no worries.
Thank you very much for this great panel and for offering this. So my name is Bernadette Highland Wood from QUT. And I try to teach the geopolitics of social media platforms to my postgrad students, which are 95% international, many from China. So I'm very aware of the fact that in the US, the intelligence community has a direct line to the heads of various companies like Facebook, Google, et cetera. They're on speed dial with each other, and can oftentimes social media companies in the US can get information that maybe they couldn't directly. So my question is about how much information flows from the CCP onto social media platforms in China. Is it overt or subtle? Is it people within China who are promulgating that information? What's the relationship, if you feel comfortable speaking about that?
Great question. I wish I could answer your question, but it will take a whole day. Anyway, just make it short. Firstly, I want to refer to what Dan has talked about, the disinformation for hire. So that we need to differentiate. There are two types of information for interference. One is disinformation for hire, which is industry by itself, and will always take advantage of elections to gain your attention, gain profit from your clicks. Secondly, there's also organized disinformation for influence, particularly by foreign government or government-affiliated organizations who would use whether direct or indirect ways to try to swing the voters to vote in a certain way. Okay, so in the US election, from what I have read and observed so far, I didn't follow closely as I did with the Taiwan election. I have to admit that. From what I've known so far, I don't see Chinese government has any particular opinion on the election, whether it's Trump or Harris. So it's mainly about sowing doubts about a West American electoral process, about its system, about voters' trust in the system. So the strategies they have used, I don't know, whether it's organized by the Chinese government or those disinformation industry for hire, because they hire those disinformation industry, which is more subtle. You don't know. So there's number of strategies they use. Common ones are we know called estrophy. So they hide the operator behind, but pretending it's somebody else, right? And then often not necessarily coming from the major platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, right? But actually coming from hacker forum, a gaming forum, and then somebody will then repost, and then finally goes to the mainstream platforms. So that's one. The other one strategy was always, we call that spamiflage, spam plus camouflage. So they would use the AI. Lots of AI strategies has been used in that, posing to be like you. So they can just take your photo and make the AI you, and then you are actually posting things you have no idea you were doing, but other people didn't know. So that kind of similar, something like this. So there are different kind of strategies. AI makes this information operation much easier, but also make it harder to trace back who did it, where it started, as I mentioned earlier.
Thanks, Haiqing. Always help us out with most challenging questions. I think one side is about the distribution of the CCP's influence, and I indeed wanted to point out the entanglement of what we understand or what we know as the CCP and China, Chinese people, Chinese system, Chinese nationality, Chinese culture, communities, etc., etc. And I think it's we cannot oversimplify all those connections, and we cannot see each Chinese citizen or Chinese international students in your class as one individual. We're complex, and one thing is about distribution of the CCP's influence. And another thing is about resistance from the community and resistance from the country, right? And we cannot deny that, okay, let's say maybe that exists, and maybe we haven't yet found out a way to figure it out, to map it out, but there's also resistance from the community, and there's also resistance from the country as well. And I think both Haiqing and we talk to people coming from Chinese migrant community background, and in one of my report with the Freedom House in 2022, the project was about mapping out Beijing's global media influence. In that report, I interviewed people, and people were really reluctant about consuming any content coming from the CCP, coming from Beijing, even China's national media. They're here, they're in Australia, they wanted to see something different rather than the identical content provided within China, if that makes more sense.
Thanks. Any other questions? There's a lot of strands that come out of that conversation. What we might do now is break for lunch, and you can take advantage of that to ask Haiqing and Fan, about some of those tantalising comments they were making about the Taiwanese elections and what was going on there, and whether they were different. But let's thank them both.